The views expressed are solely those of the speaker and not necessarily those of Paltalk.com, AVM Software, or its advertisers.
News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of Paltalk.com, the largest multimedia interactive program on the internet with more than 4 million unique users on demand on iTunes, on demand on YouTube, on demand on my site, GaryBaumgarten.com, where you are encouraged to post your comments, whether you agree with yours truly or not. No retribution. And by the way, there's a very interesting story there about how some guy misrepresenting himself as a representative of companies in 3 countries, not Iran, was able to procure military weaponry, military supplies for Iran. It's a very interesting story and scary indeed. And thanks to our good friends at CRN Digital Talk Radio, we're syndicated to an additional 12 million households. I am your host, Gary Baumgarten. Welcome to the show and happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. Well, I'm in Detroit, as many of you know, and the American auto industry is teetering on collapse. Here in the Motor City, the people are suffering the worst unemployment in the nation, and that's while the auto industry continues to limp along. Detroit is responding in a number of ways. Ford Motor Company, which did not accept government bailout money, renegotiated contracts to become competitive with Japanese automakers. Ford, GM, and Chrysler are all coming out with new competing versions of their best muscle cars. Ford has developed a hybrid Mercury Milan that rivals anything the Japanese have to offer. Chevy is soon coming out with its long-awaited Volt electric car. GM is talking bankruptcy as an option, but Sam Ratner, who heads President Obama's automotive task force, doesn't feel bankruptcy is the best way to go, and in fact would rather see companies merge than declare bankruptcy. Well, here to give us the best insight into the auto industry and its future on News Talk Online at Paltalk.com is Detroit Free Press auto critic Mark Phelan. Mark, welcome to News Talk Online at Paltalk.com.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Nice to have you here. You've got a great radio voice. Have you ever done radio before on newspapers?
Only when somebody's good enough to invite me to show up.
Well, you know what? Somebody's going to hear you on this show and say, you know, Mark, we got a place for you on the radio. So tell me, it's a very complex situation. Let's go back to the causes of what's happening here. There are those in this audience, I happen to disagree with them, but it's a fair point of view in my opinion, who would say, Gary, Mark, the auto industry created the problem. The auto industry should bite the bullet. The auto industry should crash and burn if necessary, not take government money, and let the free enterprise system work its way back up. Is that a fair criticism?
Well, like most things, there's a kernel of truth in it. The problems that GM, Chrysler, and Ford have today and had for the last few years stem from really bad decisions and really bad vehicles that they built for many years. Mm-hmm. What's changed, and because they betrayed people's trust, a lot of folks haven't accepted this yet, is that Ford and GM in particular these days are building a lot of good, very fuel-efficient, high-quality vehicles. Chrysler's in a different place because they didn't have the resources to develop the small vehicles, and they just never quite got the quality down. But that's what pushed these companies to the brink a few months before every other automaker in the world landed on the brink. But if you look around today, virtually every car company in the world is asking its government and other governments for help. I mean, Toyota, which is the gold standard for solid management, has gone to the Japanese government and said, we need $2 billion of government guaranteed loans because there's no credit on them.
Okay, Gary, we're not hearing the guest too well.
Okay, so there were problems that they laid the groundwork for, but Ford and GM in particular are really just collateral damage in the economic meltdown. If the finance system hadn't frozen up, neither of those companies would be asking for bailout money.
It's interesting because you mentioned that the Japanese are actually going to their government for assistance, but in in a sense, they have been receiving the largesse of the government all along, because doesn't the government pay the health care costs of the workers for the Japanese auto workers? And the big three had to pay based on the contracts that they negotiated.
Yeah, that's a structural disadvantage that the American companies are at versus really every other industrialized country in the world. I mean, you know, the figures generally say that $1,000 to $2,000 of the price of every car that rolls out of a big three factory goes to health care for current workers and retirees. And that's something that, you know, Toyota, Honda, Mercedes, Volkswagen, none of them have to worry about because there are government systems. In fact, even in Canada, where GM, Ford, and Chrysler all build vehicles, they don't have to worry about that. And that makes their Canadian plants more competitive in many ways than their American ones.
It's interesting you said that the perception, and sometimes the perception is far more important than reality, is that the Japanese in particular build a more fuel efficient and better quality vehicle. But I mentioned in the introduction the Mercury Milan. Well, in its class, there's not a single vehicle made by anybody that hybrid that can compete with it in terms of mileage.
And it's an amazingly sophisticated, well put together vehicle. I tested one back around the beginning of the year, and I was just astounded at how well it functioned. And it delivers on all of the things that they promise in terms of fuel economy, drivability. It is the benchmark for hybrids these days, I think.
What about the Chevy Volt? Is this going to save Chevy? And somebody had suggested to me that Chevy should follow the Toyota Lexus model, and GM should, and build a luxury vehicle and a standard Chevy, a Malibu or something, or an Impala, whatever it is. I guess Impala would be the vehicle today, and forget about all the other lines. And clearly, you know, they do have way too many Oldsmobile, Buick, too many lines out there.
I'll start with the Volt, if that's all right. Mm-hmm. That car itself won't save General Motors. The technology that's in it could. The Volt is going to be the first one to use a new technology where there are batteries that can take you purely on electric power up to 40 miles, which is all of the driving that most Americans do in a given day, the statistics show. If you want to go farther than that, there's a little engine that kicks on and it recharges the batteries. So you've got a generator on board, but only for when you need it. And the problem with pure electric vehicles in the past has been you might only drive 70, 80 miles once or twice a year, but you weren't going to buy a car that would not allow you to do that, or to drive from Detroit to Chicago or whatever else it might be. This gets you out of that bind. You can do whatever you like, but you don't use any gasoline. In my case, probably 350 days out of the year, I would not drive more than 40 miles.
What kind of mileage is to get on the engine, on the combustible engine?
It depends on how you measure it. If it is the combustion engine driving it all the time, they're saying about 50 miles a gallon. However, if you were to drive, say, 60 miles, and the first 40 miles of it was pure electric, and then the gasoline engine